Hello, everybody. Welcome to another edition of the Basu and Godin Notebook on this Monday, June 2nd. I am Marc-Antoine Godin, somewhere in Buffalo, along with Arp and Basu, definitely in Montreal. I recognize the furniture.
Definitely in Montreal. I'll be in Buffalo later this week. Our next episode, actually, I'll probably be in Buffalo at that time. But we'll be passing each other on the highway. But obviously, Marc-Antoine is in Buffalo to mine information ahead of the NHL Scouting Combine. I will be there for the actual Combine itself, which is this weekend with all the testing and talking to a whole bunch of guys. So we'll have, next Monday's episode should be very interesting. But for now, we have a treat. We have a guest later on that we will be talking to. We have RDS Laval Rocket analyst, Bruno Gervais, who also does analysis or does studio work on the Canadiens in RDS. But we focus largely on the Rocket, who are down 3-0 in their Eastern Conference Final series to the Charlotte Checkers, and a pretty decisive 3-0 at that. It's not one of those 3-0s where those 3 one-goal games. They were 3 games that were not particularly close. So we're going to talk to Bruno about that. We have our Monday mailbag segment a little bit later. But before we get to that, I don't know. We had
You had a piece in the Athletic on Lane Hutson's next contract, because I wanted to know more about that, about your process, your conclusions that you came out with after doing a lot of digging, statistical comparisons. I've seen you live looking at the zone starts during the playoffs and things like that. I know you went into great detail to understand what would be the proper comparables for a contract with between the Montreal Canadiens and Lane Hutson. Some people say that he could look at Jake Sanderson's money. Other people think that they could look, if the projection is encouraging enough, he could look maybe at some Quinn Hughes money. What would you say was your main takeaway doing that exercise, going through it?
Well, there's a few things. First of all, a player's usage is often used against him, right? And so Lane Hutson had a massive offensive zone usage in the playoffs. It's only 5 games, but he started 87.5% of the shifts, I think, in the offensive zone. It was by a considerable margin the highest of any regular defenseman in the playoffs. I think Gostisbehere was second, who is the guy that we always mention as being the one undersized D. He was somewhere in the 70s. So, and that's not Lane Hutson's fault necessarily, but it is a reflection of the extent to which he's trusted to play in the defensive zone in that sort of environment. But really, after looking at everything, my main takeaway, it's funny that you mentioned Hughes and Sanderson, right? So, Sanderson signed his extension with a year left on entry level. Some people kind of raised some eyebrows when he got 8 times 8. Essentially, it's 8.05 million times 8, because he hadn't really necessarily shown that yet in the NHL, even though it was clear to anyone who had watched him that that's the player that he will likely become. And it wasn't really a very high risk commitment from Ottawa. But to that point, he hadn't necessarily slam dunk made it obvious that he was going to be an offensive. He would produce the amount of offense that would justify that kind of a number. Defensively, it seemed quite obvious that his mobility and everything that he does would be very valuable. But even going into his draft year, the question was how much offense does he have in him? And the Senators believed in him from the get-go, made the right selection, frankly, a total slam dunk draft for them to have 2 top 5 picks. I think they were picked 2nd and 4th, if I'm not mistaken. But anyhow, whatever it was, they took Stützle and Sanderson very high, and teams had a shot at both of them and passed on them, and they would arguably go 1-2 in a redraft right now. So, so that's a guy that I looked at basically did a very basic for anyone who hasn't read the piece, but a very, very basic filtering of NHL defensemen. 26 years or younger, 50 games played minimum, 0.5 points per game, nothing else. And so that's obviously a lot more goes into contract projections, comparables, everything. There's a lot of minutia that goes into coming up with those lists. This is not that. This is a very, very big, but it still gave a pretty workable list
Mhm.
that made sense. It came up with 14 guys, 3 of whom are still on entry level deals. Hutson being one of them, Luke Hughes and Jackson Lacombe being the 2 others. But you have 11 guys: Rasmus Dahlin, Kel McCarr, Moritz Seider, Mikhail Sergachev, Miro Heiskanen, Owen Power, Jake Sanderson, Quinn Hughes, Noah Dobson, Thomas Harley, and Evan Bouchard. And what's interesting about the group is that you have 3 different categories of players in terms of how the second contract was handled. Um, in the case of Bouchard, Harley, Dobson, Dahlin, and Sergachev, they signed bridge deals coming out of entry level. 2 or 3 years. Dahlin's was a 3-year, $6 million a year, 3-year, $18 million bridge, but a bridge nonetheless. All these guys signed bridge deals. Sergachev and Dahlin have obviously cashed in. Um, Dobson, Harley, and Bouchard are on the verge of doing so right now. So you could do that knowing that your third contract is going to cost you a ton. Dahlin's at 11 million, Sergachev's at 8.5. That was signed in Tampa. So he probably took a bit of a Tampa discount, state tax discount, what have you. And luckily for him, got traded to another team that's in a no state tax state in Utah. But still, that's one way to go about it. The other way is McCarr and Hughes. So McCarr and Hughes each signed 6-year deals coming out of entry level. So the sort of the medium term bridge, the Matthews bridge, if you will.
Yeah.
McCarr gave up 1 year of UFA. Hughes gave up none. So that's why McCarr's AAV on that was 9 million. Hughes was 7.85, so less than Sanderson. But right now, if you talk to anyone in Vancouver and ask them, would you have rather the Canucks had signed Quinn Hughes for 8 years? They'd probably say yes, because they're pretty freaked out about what's going to happen after next season.
Yeah.
And Cale McCarr, same kind of thing, but the Mikko Rantanen trade is largely predicated on the fact that McCarr's contract's going to be up soon, and it's going to be upwards of 14, 15, who knows how many million he's going to deserve every penny of it. But so that's a give and take, right? You get a more manageable cap hit with those guys, but it comes to a head sooner. And if Hutson were to perform at a Hughes-like level, which is not inconceivable, that would mean at this point, 7 years down the line, they'd have to deal with it again, which is not the end of the world. And then you had the guys who signed long-term straight out of entry level, which includes Seider, Heiskanen, Power, and Sanderson. And so those are the 3 kind of options. And the Canadiens have often done, the Doc deal and the Newhook deal were very similar, 4-year deals, which is not a term that you often see coming out of entry level. So they have ways of thinking differently about this. So they could obviously come up with their own model. But what I come away with is that it just seems extremely unlikely that Lane Hutson is going to sign anything this summer. Like, it's that group of comparables is already a group of the best young defensemen in the league. Like, and there's no, Adam Fox isn't on that list because he's a little too old for my admittedly arbitrary age cutoff. Well, it wasn't arbitrary. I didn't want, 27 being the UFA year. I didn't want UFAs in there. So, but Adam Fox isn't there. There's all sorts of other, but point being that from the Canadiens' perspective, I don't think the comparables will change. Like, even if Hutson has like a so-so year, well, if Hutson has a knockout year, let's say he gets 75 points next year, or even 80, like, will it change all that much in terms of who he's going to be compared to and what basis you're coming up with a contract for him on? Are the Canadiens really risking that much by waiting a year in terms of him pricing himself into an even higher tier? Like, I don't know if there is a higher tier than what we're talking about here. And in terms of Hutson, it really depends. Like, it's if you want to get your max value, it's in your best interest to go out and not, because the only way I see the Canadians doing this a year early, as I mentioned in the piece, is if they feel they're getting some kind of value out of it. If they feel that they're getting him at a number like they did with Slavkovsky and Gulli to some extent, that will age well. I don't see really any benefit for Hutson to do that.
No.
So
No, since day one, when it comes to that whole debate, I don't see what's the incentive for Hutson to do it, apart from security. And I'm sure that the Canadians promoted that idea to him. You never know what can happen, and there's it. Famously, Brendan Gallagher said there's something to be said about guaranteeing money. Yes,
yeah,
that's true for any hockey player,
yeah,
but he's in a position where if he's confident enough that he can repeat what he did this year and break new grounds in other areas of the game, well, he's only going to get more money. And with the rising salary cap, it's going to be in favor for a player of his caliber first and foremost.
yeah. And so, of those three models, and don't forget the 6 years on Makar and Hughes, but consider that like sort of a mid-range bridge, right, or a longer bridge. So you have the 2 or 3 year bridge, let's say a 4 to 6 year bridge, then you have the full 8 year term. There's no scenario in which the only scenario that would likely be done this summer is the 8 year one, and to get the 8 year one, Hutson would have to take probably less than he would get if he signed it next year, or if he took a bridge, which I think, if from a pure earning standpoint, like what would make the most sense for Hutson is like a 5 year bridge, right? Like that's really that's the real Matthews model, is get yourself as close to free agency as you can without quite reaching it, so that your next contract is really massive. But the big takeaway from Ken Hughes' answer on it when he spoke to us at the end of the season is, we're gonna talk to his agent and find out what's important to Lane, and that's the real key here. Is money the most important thing to Lane Hutson? I doubt it. But is it just about Lane Hutson? There's an agent, there's a family, there's all sorts of things where, you can. It's not just his priorities. It's his group's priorities. It's the people who brought him here, and he's going to be part of that decision. But if what's important to Lane Hutson is being with the Canadians as long as he possibly can, that doesn't mean he necessarily has to sign an 8 year deal this summer, but, they can wait. Because the other thing that came out, the last thing I'll mention that I think is the most revelatory, is of the 11 players that I mentioned earlier, 9 of them signed after their entry-level contract expired or was about to expire. Only two of those players, Owen Power and Jake Sanderson, signed a year out from their contract expiring. So it's not unprecedented. And none of those guys signed offer sheets. All of them stayed with the team that they're on. So it just seems to me like that's the most likely scenario here.